A galaxy burns. 7 years of war have turned entire star systems into mass graves. And now, in a shattered throne room filled with broken glass and the smell of burning silk, a king kneels before his conquerors. He offers his most beautiful daughter as a prize. Perfect, radiant, a goddess carved from centuries of genetic perfection, the human soldier walks right past her. His boots crunch over glass. His armor is scorched. His hands are shaking. He stops in front of the shadow, a girl no one sees, crippled, scarred, leaning on a wooden cane in a gray dress covered in dust. He points at her. The king begs him to reconsider. The court gasps. The perfect daughter's face twists with rage. But the soldier knows something they don't. He's been watching. And what he saw this girl do when nobody was looking changed everything. She just doesn't know yet what's hiding inside her spine. She was 9 years old the first time she understood she was garbage. Not suspected it, not feared it, understood it. The way you understand gravity. The way you understand that fire burns and cold kills, and fathers don't always love their daughters. Elara remembered the hallway. Long, white, smelling of something sharp and chemical that made her eyes water. The Royal Medical Hall of the Dominion capital. Floors so polished she could see her own reflection. A small girl, thin, leaning on a crutch that was too tall for her because nobody had bothered to measure her for a proper one. Her father walked ahead. King Aldrich didn't walk with her. He walked ahead, always ahead, because walking beside her would mean acknowledging her pace. And her pace was slow, and slow was weakness, and weakness was an abomination in the Dominion. The doctor had been kind. That was what made it worse. He had knelt down, looked at her spine scans, smiled at her with that careful, practiced gentleness that adults use when they're about to say something that matters. The degeneration is significant, Your Majesty, but treatable, entirely treatable. A carbon fiber vertebral replacement, 6 weeks of recovery. She would walk normally, run, even. Elara had felt something crack open in her chest, something warm, something dangerous. Hope. Her father's voice had killed it instantly. Cybernetic implantation. Yes, Your Majesty, a mechanical augment fused to no. One word, that was all it took. The doctor had blinked. Your Majesty, the procedure is routine. The success rate. I said no. Aldrich had not raised his voice. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. The purity laws are clear. A body is born as it is meant to be. If she cannot stand on her own spine, then her spine has spoken. We do not overwrite nature with machines. And then he had turned, walked away. Not fast, not slow, just away. The doctor had looked at Elara. She had looked back at him, and she had seen it. The exact moment his kindness collapsed into pity, into helplessness, into the quiet understanding that he could fix her body, but he could not fix her father. I'm sorry, child, he had whispered. Elara hadn't cried. She had learned something much worse than crying that day. She had learned to expect nothing, because expecting nothing meant nothing could be taken from you. She was 9. She would carry that lesson for 15 years. The bombs fell on a Tuesday, which shouldn't matter, the day of the week. But it did, because Tuesdays were when the palace laundry staff washed the royal linens, which meant 300 servants were on the upper floors. The floors with the largest windows, the floors closest to the sky that was falling. Elara felt the first impact in her teeth, a deep, shuddering vibration that rattled through the marble floors and climbed up her cane and settled into the metal pins in her spine like a tuning fork struck by God. Then the sound hit. Not an explosion. Explosions are brief. This was a sustained, rolling thunder that didn't stop. It folded over itself, grew louder, became a living thing that ate the air and replaced it with heat and dust and screaming. She was in the lower corridor, near the servant kitchens, where she always was, because Elara lived in the parts of the palace that the royal family didn't visit. The basement, the service tunnels, the laundry halls. She slept in a room next to the washing machines because her father had decided years ago that proximity to the family quarters was a privilege, and Elara had not earned proximity. The second impact blew out the eastern wall of the great hall above her. She heard it collapse. A sound like a mountain clearing its throat, and then she heard the screaming. Not the screaming of soldiers. Soldiers scream with anger, with defiance. This was different. This was the high, thin, breathless screaming of people who had never expected to be hurt. Servants, cooks, laundry workers, the invisible people who kept the Golden Palace running while the Golden people drank glowing wine and pretended the war was happening somewhere else. Elara moved. She didn't think about it, didn't calculate, didn't weigh the risks. Her body simply moved. Because her body had spent 24 years being told it was broken, and broken things have nothing left to lose. She climbed the stairs, 3 flights, with a cane, with a spine that sent jagged bolts of electric pain down her left leg with every step. The stairwell was filling with dust, thick, gray, chalky. It coated her throat and turned her spit to paste. On the second-floor landing, a woman, face down, leg bent the wrong way. Blood, copper-green Dominion blood, pooling beneath her like spilled paint. Elara dropped her cane, grabbed the woman's arms, dragged. The woman screamed. Elara kept dragging. Down 1 flight, through a service door, into the wine cellar. The walls were stone here, thick, old, built to keep wine cool, but also built to absorb shock. She went back up. A boy, maybe 12, holding his arm against his chest. His eyes were empty. Shock. Elara grabbed his good hand and pulled him down the stairs. He didn't resist, didn't speak, just followed her like a sleepwalker. She went back up, a child, 3 years old, maybe 4, sitting in the middle of the hallway surrounded by broken glass, crying, not the loud, angry crying of a child who wants attention, the quiet, hiccuping crying of a child who has given up on being heard. Elara picked her up. The child weighed almost nothing, but Elara's spine didn't care about weight. It cared about angles. And carrying a child downstairs meant bending. And bending meant her vertebrae ground against each other like broken gears. She made it to the second-floor landing before a ceiling beam cracked loose. She threw her body over the child, took the debris on her back. Something hot sliced across her neck. The old plasma scar, ripped open. Copper-green blood soaked through her gray dress. She kept moving. Down, down, into the cellar. She went back up 7 more times. On the 8th trip, her leg gave out completely. She fell on the stairs, face first, tasted blood, her own, copper and salt. She lay there for a moment, breathing, feeling the building shake above her, and somewhere, far below, she heard the blast doors of the deep bunker seal shut. A low, final, hydraulic thud. Her family was safe. They had not sent anyone to find her. They had not even counted the servants. Elara pushed herself up, wiped the blood from her mouth, climbed. She saved 31 people that day. She tore the curtains into bandages, gave her water ration to the boy with the broken arm, held the 3-year-old against her chest for 4 hours while the ceiling groaned and dust fell like gray snow. Nobody saw. Nobody knew, except one person, 600 miles above the dying palace, in the command bay of the USS Valiant. A man was watching. Major Declan Hale didn't look like a hero. Heroes in the stories had clear eyes and steady hands and a jawline that suggested moral certainty. Declan had none of these things. His eyes were the color of river water, murky, tired, ringed with the dark circles of a man who hadn't slept properly in 8 months. His hands were steady only when they were holding a rifle. Without one, they trembled, just slightly, just enough that he kept them in his pockets during briefings so nobody would notice. I was 38 years old, and he felt 60. The war had done that. 7 years. 7 years of mud and plasma fire and frozen trenches, and friends dying in ways that didn't fit neatly into casualty reports. 7 years of watching the Dominion Empire treat the galaxy like a chessboard where every piece was expendable except the king. Declan's battalion, the Iron Wolves, had broken the siege at the Orion colonies. 300 of his men had gone in. 87 had come out. The rest were still there, in the mud, in the ice, in the mass graves that the Dominion had dug and then forgotten to mark. I had earned the right to choose the spoils. General Maddox had told him this with a clap on the shoulder and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The greatest warrior picks the prize. Ancient Dominion law. Humanity had invoked it as a final humiliation. But Declan wasn't thinking about prizes. He was thinking about Kessler 9. 8 months ago, a forward operating base on the edge of Dominion territory, intelligence had flagged a building. Munitions depot, confirmed by 3 separate sources. Declan had ordered the strike. Standard kinetic bombardment. Clean. Surgical. The building had collapsed in 4 seconds. It wasn't a munitions depot. It was a shelter. 47 civilians. Women, children, elderly. The kind of people who don't show up on thermal imaging because they're too malnourished to generate heat signatures. He had stood in the command bay and watched the satellite feed as rescue crews pulled bodies from the rubble. Small bodies, wrapped in blankets that had done nothing to protect them from kinetic bombardment. A woman clutching a photograph. A man who had thrown himself over 2 children. It hadn't saved them. But the gesture, the instinct, the choice to cover someone else with your own body. That was the thing that lived in Declan's skull at 3 in the morning, because he had seen Elara do the same thing on the drone footage. Throw herself over a child, take the debris on her back. 47. He knew the number the way he knew his own name. It lived in him, behind his ribs, in the space where sleep used to be. The military tribunal had cleared him. Faulty intelligence. No culpability. They had said it like it was a gift, like absolution could be stamped on a form and filed. Declan had accepted the verdict, shaken hands, walked to his quarters, opened the drawer where he kept the medication. 2 pills, taken dry. And then he sat on the edge of his bunk and stared at the wall until the shaking stopped. He did this every night. So when the tactical briefing lit up the main screen of the Valiant's command bay and the drone footage began rolling, he wasn't expecting anything, just another damage assessment. Structural analysis of the Dominion Palace. Weak points for the ground assault. Columns that had cracked, walls that had shifted. Then the camera panned across the 2nd floor, and he saw her. A small figure, gray dress, dragging someone 3 times her weight across a debris-strewn hallway. A cane abandoned on the landing behind her, her left leg buckling with every step. Blood on her neck, copper green, bright against the gray dust. "Ignore that," General Maddox said from the front of the room. "Focus on the structural grid. Section 7. The load-bearing pillar has a fracture pattern that suggests..." Declan wasn't listening. He was watching the girl go back up the stairs. She fell on the 2nd floor landing, got up, kept going. "Rewind that," Declan said. The room went quiet. Major, the intelligence officer, blinked. "Rewind 30 seconds. They rewound. He watched again. The girl picking up a child, covering the child with her own body as debris rained down, something slicing her neck open. Blood. And she kept moving. "Who is that?" Declan asked. The intelligence officer checked the palace dossier, scrolled, frowned. "Princess Elara, 3rd daughter, listed as non-essential, medical status disabled, spinal degeneration, no diplomatic profile, no public appearances on record. She's not even in the official royal portraits. Non-essential." Declan watched the footage 3 more times. The room moved on to structural analysis. He didn't hear any of it. He was watching a girl with a broken spine save people nobody else remembered. And he was thinking about 47 people he couldn't save. The surrender smelled like ozone, copper, and burning silk. The grand throne room of the Dominion capital was a cathedral of destruction. The soaring pillars, cracked, the stained glass ceiling, shattered. Its fragments scattered across the marble floor like the shed scales of a dying dragon. King Aldrich knelt in the center of it all. His silk robes were immaculate. His face was gray. His hands, clasped before him, were shaking. For 7 years, this man had sent armies to exterminate humanity, had ordered the bombardment of Earth's colonies with plasma fire that turned cities into glass, had watched from crystal balconies while billions died and called it genetic destiny. Now he knelt on the broken glass of his own vanity. Declan stood a few paces away. His combat armor was scorched, black carbon scoring across the chest plate, a plasma burn on his left shoulder that the medics hadn't had time to treat. His rifle hung at his side. His hands were in his pockets, because his hands were shaking, and he would be damned if Aldrich saw that. General Maddox read the terms. His voice echoed through the ruined hall. Cold, precise, the armistice. The reparations, the complete and unconditional surrender of the Dominion Empire to the United Earth Coalition. And then the final clause, the right of spoils. An ancient Dominion tradition, the conquering army's greatest warrior selects one prize from the royal household, a relic, a weapon, a person. It was meant to be the ultimate humiliation. Humanity had chosen to use the Dominion's own laws against them. Maddox turned to Declan. Major Hale, the right is yours. Claim your prize so we can sign this and leave. Aldrich moved. It was subtle, a shift of his body, a tilt of his head, a slight push of his hand against the back of the woman standing directly before the dais. Princess Seraphina. She stepped forward, and she was, without question, the most beautiful creature Declan had ever seen. Tall, luminous, skin like polished pearl, hair the color of liquid silver cascading over bare shoulders. A face that had been sculpted by genetics and intention and centuries of selective breeding to be absolutely, devastatingly perfect. She smiled at him. It was a smile that had ended wars, started them too, probably. A smile that promised power and forbidden knowledge and pleasures that human biology couldn't even properly imagine. The Dominion offers its finest, Aldrich said. His voice cracked only slightly. Take my eldest, Commander. She will serve you well. Beside Seraphina stood the second daughter, Isolde, shorter, darker. Her silver eyes didn't smile. They calculated. They swept across the room, counted the soldiers, noted the exits, filed information. She was the kind of woman who could burn down a building and have an alibi that 3 witnesses would swear to. And then, behind them both, half a step back, almost hidden by the shadow of a shattered pillar, a figure so still she might have been part of the rubble. Elara. She wore no spun gold, no starlight fabric. Her dress was ash gray, the same color as the dust that still clung to her hair. A wooden cane supported her left side. Her spine curved slightly, visibly. Her left hand gripped the cane so hard her knuckles had gone white, and on the left side of her neck, running from just below her ear to beneath the collar of her dress, a jagged, ugly, plasma scar. She was staring at the floor. She had spent her entire life staring at the floor, because looking up meant making eye contact, and making eye contact meant being seen, and being seen, in this family, was never safe. Declan's boots crunched over broken glass. He walked past the king, past Seraphina and her nuclear smile, past Isolde and her knife-sharp gaze. He stopped directly in front of the shadow by the pillar. Elara flinched. She gripped her cane tighter, squeezed her eyes shut. She had been told what humans were. Flesh-eating savages, monsters who bathed in blood. She expected a blow, or an execution, or something worse. She braced. Her. The word hit the room like a gunshot. Silence. Then a gasp. Then a murmur. Then chaos. Duke Reginald, a prominent noble standing near the far wall, choked audibly. King Aldrich's jaw fell open with an almost comical slowness. And Seraphina, beautiful, perfect, immaculate Seraphina, her face twisted. It was fast, just a flash. But Declan caught it. The mask cracked and underneath was something rotten, something enraged, something that had never, in its entire pampered existence, been told no. Her Aldrich stammered, all diplomatic grace gone. Major, surely you jest. That is Elara. She is defective, crippled. She holds no political value, no beauty. She is a shadow. Please, take Seraphina. Take the crown jewels. Take anything. Declan slowly turned his head. He looked at the king, really looked, at the man who had sent millions to die, who had knelt on the glass of his own windows with perfectly clean robes while the blood of his servants dried on the floors above. "I didn't ask for an inventory report," Declan said. His voice was quiet, which was worse than loud. "I made my choice." He turned back to Elara. She had opened her eyes, staring up at him, and in those eyes, silver, wide, wet. He saw something that cracked him open wider than any plasma bolt ever had. She wasn't just afraid, she was confused, because no one had ever chosen her. For anything. Ever. Declan extended his hand, palm up, open. He didn't grab her, didn't pull, didn't assert. He just held his hand out, slowly, without expectation, the way you'd offer your hand to something wild and frightened. "Come with me, princess," he said, softly, pitched so only she could hear. "You're done being a ghost in this house." Elara stared at his hand, scarred, massive. The knuckles were cracked and calloused, and the armor plating on his gauntlet was dented in 3 places. It was the ugliest hand she had ever seen. It was the first hand anyone had ever offered her. She placed her fingers against his palm. His grip closed around her hand. Gentle. So gentle it made her breath catch. And he turned, adjusted his pace, matched her limp, step for step, without comment, without impatience, as if he had all the time in the universe. They walked past the king, past Isolde, who said nothing, just watched, filing, her silver eyes tracking every detail like a camera that never stopped recording. Past Seraphina, who couldn't keep her mouth shut. "You would choose garbage over a goddess. Human." Declan stopped. He looked at the eldest princess, up and down, slowly, with an expression of such thorough, complete, surgical disgust that Seraphina actually took a step back. "I've seen enough polished statues in this city, princess," Declan said, "and I know what hides behind them. I'll take the one who actually knows how to bleed." He walked Elara out of the shattered palace. Behind them, the supposed masters of the galaxy choked on their own pride. General Maddox was waiting at the shuttle bay. I didn't look angry. That was the dangerous part. Angry men shout. Dangerous men go quiet. And Maddox was quiet the way deep water is quiet. Currents underneath. Currents that pull you down. A word, Major. It wasn't a request. Declan handed Elara to a medic for a preliminary scan. "Stay with her. I'll be right back." She gripped her cane and watched him walk away, and something cold settled in her chest, because she recognized that look on the general's face. She had seen it on her father's face 1,000 times. Displeasure. In a narrow briefing room off the main corridor, door sealed. Maddox leaned against the table and crossed his arms. "Seraphina," he said. "What about her?" "She was the target. Hale, I needed you to pick Seraphina. She has operational value. She knows the Dominion spy networks across 6 star systems. She has access codes, diplomatic contacts. She's a walking intelligence goldmine." Declan said nothing. Instead, Maddox continued, measured. "You chose a crippled girl with no political profile, no intelligence value, no military utility, a girl who isn't even listed in her own family's official records. Explain that to me." "I don't have to explain my choice, sir. The right was mine. Ancient law. Ancient law is a tool. Major, you used it like a sentiment." Declan met his eyes, held them. "I didn't pick a strategic asset. General, I picked a person." Maddox stared at him for a long beat, the weight of unspoken history between 2 men who have both signed orders that killed people. "That's a luxury dead men can't afford. Major," Maddox said softly, "remember that." He straightened, walked to the door, paused. "I hope she's worth it." He left. Declan stood alone in the briefing room, and he thought about Kessler 9, about 47 people, about how Maddox was right. Strategically, tactically, logically, Maddox was absolutely right, and it didn't matter, because Declan had spent 8 months being right, being strategic, being logical, and being unable to sleep. And somewhere between the drone footage and the throne room, he had decided that being right wasn't enough anymore. He had to be good. The USS Valiant was not beautiful. It was a flying fortress, angular, gray, covered in carbon scoring and welded repair patches, and the general aesthetic of something that had been built to survive rather than to impress. Red warning lights blinked in the corridors. The air tasted like recycled oxygen and machine oil. The constant low hum of the fusion engines vibrated through the deck plates and settled into your bones until you forgot what silence sounded like. For Elara, it was a different planet. As the shuttle docked and the bay doors opened, she gripped her cane and stared. Soldiers. Everywhere. Massive. Towering. Clad in dark fatigues and heavy exoframes. Carrying weapons that looked like they could crack a moon in half. They stopped their work. Turned. Stared at the small alien woman limping down the ramp beside their commander. Elara braced for it. The jeers. The laughter. The thrown objects. In the Dominion, the lower castes threw stones at her when she walked through the market. The servants never did. But everyone else, the merchants, the minor nobles, the children who had been taught that imperfection was contagious. She waited for the first rock. Instead, Major on deck, a voice, sharp, barking, and every soldier in the hangar snapped to attention. Hands slapped against chests, spines straightened, eyes forward. They weren't saluting her. They were saluting Declan. But none of them, not one, looked at her with disgust. Curiosity, yes. Confusion, certainly, but not disgust. Elara didn't know what to do with that. She had been prepared for cruelty. She had a lifetime of practice in absorbing cruelty, kindness and indifference and respect. These were foreign languages, and she didn't have a dictionary. They made it halfway down the central corridor before the first problem. Sergeant Voss, I was standing in the middle of the passageway, not blocking it exactly, but not moving either. A big man, wide shoulders, shaved head. The kind of face that had been rearranged by fists and shrapnel so many times it had given up trying to be symmetrical. His eyes were locked on Elara, not with curiosity, with hate, the pure, distilled, uncut kind that only comes from grief, from loss so deep it turns into something hard and permanent, like a bone that heals wrong. Sergeant, Declan said, neutral. Major. Voss didn't move. His jaw worked, like he was chewing on words, trying to swallow them, failing. Permission to speak freely. Denied? With respect, sir. I'm going to speak anyway. Declan stopped walking. Elara stopped behind him. She could feel it, the rage radiating off the sergeant like heat from a furnace. That thing, Voss said, and the word thing landed like a slap, is Dominion. Her kind killed Tommy, my brother, 22 years old. They put him in a trench at Orion and they burned him alive with plasma fire. And now she gets to sleep in an officer's cabin, with clean sheets, and a viewport. His voice cracked on the last word, just barely. Just enough. While Tommy's in a hole in the ground that nobody even marked. Silence. Elara didn't flinch. She had been called worse. Thing was not the worst word she knew, but she could hear the pain underneath the anger. And pain, she understood. Declan looked at Voss for a long moment, and what he saw was not insubordination. What he saw was a man who had buried his little brother in alien soil and never gotten the chance to say goodbye. Noted, Sergeant, Declan said quietly. Voss stared at him, then at Elara, then back. His fists clenched, unclenched. He stepped aside, slowly, like it cost him something. Declan walked past. Elara walked past, and she heard Voss's breathing behind her. Ragged, wet, the breathing of a man trying very hard not to cry in a corridor full of soldiers. She said nothing, because there was nothing to say. His brother was dead. Her people had killed him, and no amount of kindness from one human major was going to change that arithmetic. Not yet. Declan walked her through the ship, past the engineering bays where technicians argued over coolant ratios, past the mess hall where the smell of something warm and savory drifted through the ventilation, past a group of soldiers playing cards in a corridor alcove who looked up, nodded at Declan, went back to their game. Normal life. People just living. Without hierarchy. Without caste. Without the suffocating protocol of who could look at whom and who deserved to breathe the same air, they stopped in front of a heavy blast door. Officers' residential sector. Declan punched in a code. The door hissed open. The room was small by Dominion standards, enormous by the standards of the broom closet Elara had slept in for the last 15 years. A real bed, with thick woolen blankets, a desk, a viewport looking out into the stars. "These are my quarters," Declan said, stepping aside. "I've had my things moved to the junior officers' barracks. You'll be safe here." He pointed to the lock panel. "Works from the inside. Nobody comes in unless you open it." Elara stood in the doorway. Her cane clicked softly on the metal floor. She looked at the bed, at the blankets, at the lock. "You are giving me your room," she said, flat, testing the words. "Yes. And you will sleep elsewhere." "Yes. And nobody will enter. Not unless you want them to." She reached out, pressed the lock button. It beeped. A red light. Locked. She pressed again. Green light. Unlocked. Locked. Unlocked. Locked. 5 times. Then she touched the blanket, ran her fingers across it. Wool. Real wool. Thick. Heavy. Warm. In her room at the palace. The basement room next to the washing machines. She had slept under a single linen sheet. No heating duct reached that far down. On cold nights. She curled into herself and shivered until dawn. This blanket was heavier than anything she had ever slept under. She pressed her face into it, breathed. It smelled like soap, like clean, like someone had washed it specifically for her. Her throat closed. Because this was the thing about kindness that nobody tells you. When you've been starved of it long enough, even a small amount doesn't feel good. It feels terrifying, like standing at the edge of a cliff, because part of you wants to lean in, and part of you knows with absolute bone-deep certainty that the moment you trust it, the moment you let your weight fall forward, the ground will be pulled away. Again. Declan watched her without comment, without impatience, because he understood, in a way that lived in his own broken places, that she was not testing the lock. She was testing whether safety was real. "I will leave you to rest," he said. "Wait." He stopped. She didn't look at him. She was still looking at the lock. But her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. Why what? Why did you choose me?" And there it was. The question that had been sitting between them since the moment he pointed at her in that ruined throne room. The question that had no simple answer. Because the truth was tangled up in drone footage and dead civilians and a girl saving strangers on a leg that should have been fixed 15 years ago. "Sit down first," Declan said. "Please." She sat on the edge of the bed, carefully, as if she expected it to be taken away. He leaned against the desk, reached into his tactical pouch, pulled out a small surveillance drone, no larger than a songbird, battered, scratched, one rotor bent. "2 days ago," he said, setting it on the desk, "during the final bombardment, my unit mapped the palace with these. We flew them through the ventilation shafts." Elara's eyes widened. "I spent hours watching the feeds." Declan continued. His voice tightened. Not with anger, with something harder to name. "I saw your family retreat to the deep bunker. Aldrich, Serafina, Isolde. They took the elite guard, locked the blast doors." A pause. "And they left 300 servants on the upper floors, trapped, while our artillery rained down." Elara's gaze dropped. "But I saw you." She looked up. "I watched you for 3 hours through a drone camera. You dragged wounded servants into the wine cellar. You tore your own dress to make bandages. You gave up your water. You carried a child down the stairs on that bad leg of yours while the ceiling was coming apart." Silence. "They were terrified," Elara whispered. "Someone had to help them. Your family didn't. My family does not see them as people." "I know." Declan's voice dropped, softened. "That's exactly why I chose you." But he didn't stop there. Because Declan Hale was not a man who lied by omission. Not anymore. 8 months ago, he said, and his voice changed, went flat, the way voices go when they're carrying too much weight. I ordered an artillery strike on a building. Intelligence said it was a Dominion weapons depot. 3 confirmed sources. I gave the order. The building came down in 4 seconds. He looked at her. It wasn't a weapons depot. It was a civilian shelter. 47 people. Women. Children. I killed 47 people who were hiding from a war they didn't start. The room was very quiet. The tribunal cleared me. Faulty intelligence. No culpability. He turned the little drone over in his hands. But I know what I did. Elara watched him, and she saw something she had never seen in a Dominion Royal, never seen in her father, never seen in her sisters. Guilt. Real guilt. The kind that eats, that doesn't sleep, that sits behind the ribs and whispers at 3 in the morning. When the general told me to pick a prize, Declan said quietly, I knew I wasn't going to take one of those polished sociopaths back to Earth. My people have bled too much to babysit tyrants. He looked at her, directly, in a way that made her feel, for the first time, like a person instead of a thing. You protected people who couldn't protect themselves, while your own family locked the door on them. That makes you more human than anyone else in that palace. He paused. And if I'm being honest, I chose you because I watched you do the thing I failed to do. You saved people. I killed them. And I thought maybe, if I could get at least this one thing right. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Elara sat very still. Tears were building behind her eyes. But she didn't let them fall. Not yet. Because she had survived 24 years by not trusting kindness. And this was a lot of kindness to swallow at once. You didn't choose me because I'm worth something, she said softly. You chose me because you're punishing yourself. Declan flinched. Nobody had ever said it to him that directly. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked away, and then, without another word, he walked to the door. Get some rest, Elara. Major Hale. He stopped, hand on the frame. Thank you, she said, for seeing me. He nodded once, and left. Elara sat on the bed, in the silence, in the warmth, in the room with the lock that worked from the inside. And for the first time in 24 years, she cried, not because she was sad, because someone had finally, called her human. The alarm came 40 minutes later, sharp, piercing, the kind of sound that drills through sleep and adrenaline and hope and replaces them all with ice. Declan's communicator screamed. He was in the junior officer's barracks, lying on a bunk that was 3 inches too short for him, staring at the ceiling, not sleeping, thinking about the way she had tested the lock 5 times. He tapped the screen. Hale here. What is it? Kellerman. The voice of the ship's chief medical officer came through, tight, fast. The controlled panic of a man who has seen too many things go wrong to waste time being calm. Major, we ran the standard bioscans from the airlock when you brought the Dominion Royal aboard. Routine check, pathogens, allergens, the usual, and it's not a pathogen. Major, it's a device. Declan sat up. The automated scanners picked up a synthetic isotope in her lower spine, embedded in the vertebral column, between L3 and L4. Major, she's carrying a localized antimatter charge. The world stopped. A smart bomb, organic casing, fused to her spinal cord. The primary trigger is linked to her heart rate. If she panics hard enough, it detonates. Declan was already moving. Out the door, down the corridor, running. But that's not all. There's a secondary failsafe, a timer, 72 hours from the moment it was armed. We checked the activation timestamp. It was armed 6 hours before the surrender ceremony. 66 hours left. It has enough yield to vaporize the entire command deck. Major, the king booby-trapped his own daughter. Declan's blood went cold. He was sprinting now, full speed, boots hammering the deck plates, soldiers flattening against the bulkheads as he barreled past. He reached the door, punched the override code. The lock disengaged. Elara was sitting on the bed, right where he'd left her. Her face was wet from crying. Her eyes were red. She looked up at him with an expression of such fragile, tentative trust that it nearly broke him. She didn't know. She had no idea what was inside her, and he was going to have to tell her. Elara. His voice came out wrong. Too rough. Too loud. He forced himself to breathe. I need you to listen to me very carefully. She saw his face. The color was gone from it. What is wrong? She whispered. So he told her. He tried to be gentle. He chose his words the way a surgeon chooses incisions. Careful. Precise. Trying to minimize damage. But there is no gentle way to tell someone that their own father filled their spine with an antimatter bomb. He watched the words hit. Each one, like a bullet. First, confusion. Her brow furrowed. The way it furrows when someone says something that doesn't fit into any category, you know. Then, understanding. Slow, like watching ice crack across a pond. Starting at the edges, moving inward. Then, something worse than screaming. Stillness. Complete. Absolute. Stillness. Her father hadn't just abandoned her. Hadn't just refused to fix her spine. Hadn't just locked her in a basement and erased her from portraits and called her a stain on his bloodline. He had turned her into a weapon. A bomb wrapped in the body of the daughter he considered expendable. A walking detonation. Timed. Calibrated. Designed to die. Designed to take the human leadership with her. He had sent her out of that throne room knowing with mathematical certainty that she would kill everyone around her. She was ammunition, and ammunition doesn't get a funeral. Something inside Elara broke. Not the way bones break. Something deeper. Something structural. The last tiny stubborn thread of hope that somewhere, buried under all the cruelty and neglect and silence. Her father still thought of her as his daughter. That thread snapped, and the sound it made inside her was louder than any bomb. Elara's cane clattered to the floor. Her chest began to heave. The monitor on Declan's wrist started beeping faster, matching the terrified acceleration of her heart, which was now the most dangerous heart on the ship. He wants me dead, she gasped. I'm a bomb. I'm going to kill everyone. Throw me out the airlock. Please, Declan, eject me before I am not throwing you anywhere. He dropped to his knees in front of her, grabbed her shoulders, not hard, but firm, anchoring. Look at me. I'm going to look at my eyes, breathe. I can't. You can. You've survived worse than this. I watched you do it. Now breathe. He pulled her forward, wrapped his arms around her, pressed her head against his chest, right over his heart. Listen to my heartbeat, he said, and his voice changed. Went calm, absolutely calm, a rock in the middle of a hurricane. Slow yours down to match mine. You are not a weapon. You are not a mistake. You are going to live. Her fingers dug into the fabric of his shirt. He felt her tears soak through to his skin. He felt the trembling, the panic, the animal terror of a woman who had just been told her own father had turned her body into a coffin. And I swear to God, Declan said, quietly, into her hair, we are going to make your father pay for this. But right now, I need you to fight. Elara closed her eyes. She listened to his heart. Steady, rhythmic, stubborn. The heart of a man who carried 47 ghosts behind his ribs and couldn't sleep without pills. But whose heart, when it mattered, beat like a drum. She matched it, beat for beat. And the beeping on his wrist, slowly, began to slow down. 140 beats per minute, 120, 100, 88, 72. Holding. Declan didn't let go. He kept his arms around her, kept his chin on top of her head, kept breathing, steady, in and out, like a metronome. And Elara, pressed against the chest of a man she had met 4 hours ago, listened to his heart and thought about how strange it was. That the first person to ever hold her was the enemy. That the first person to call her human was not human at all. Not to her people. They were both broken. They were both bombs, in their own way. And maybe, she thought, as her heartbeat steadied and the alarm on his wrist went quiet, maybe that was exactly why he had chosen her. Outside the viewport, the stars burned in silence, indifferent, Ancient, uncaring, but inside the room, two broken people held each other, and somewhere in the walls of the ship, wired into the spine of a girl who had never been loved, a clock was ticking. 66 hours. The bomb waited. 66 hours. That's how long they had. Before the backup timer turned Elara's spine into a small star. Before the USS Valiant and its 3,000 crew members became a cloud of superheated particles drifting through the void. 66 hours is a lot of time. Enough to fall in love. Enough to write a novel. Enough to regret every major decision you've ever made and still have time left over to make a worse one. It is not a lot of time to defuse a bomb that's been surgically fused to a living woman's spinal cord. Dr. Kellerman delivered the briefing in the ship's secure medical conference room, a small, white, aggressively lit space that smelled of recycled air and bad decisions. Declan stood against the back wall, arms crossed, face blank. The blankness that comes not from calm, but from the opposite. From so much happening inside that the outside shuts down to compensate. Kellerman pulled up the holographic scan. Elara's spine rotated slowly in midair, glowing blue, beautiful, almost delicate, except for the thing wrapped around her lower vertebrae. It looked alive, a parasitic mass of synthetic tissue and microcircuitry, coiled around her spinal column between L3 and L4 like a luminous green serpent. It pulsed, slowly, rhythmically, feeding off her Dominion biology, her copper-based blood, her protein markers. It's not a conventional explosive, Kellerman said. His voice was steady, the steady of a man who has delivered very bad news many times and has learned that panic is contagious. It's a bioweapon, a synthetic parasite. It has literally integrated itself into her spinal cord, fused at the cellular level, roots threaded through her nerve clusters. Can you cut it out? Declan asked. If I cut it out, it triggers the antimatter reaction. If I use an EMP to disable its circuitry, it eats her central nervous system on the way out, like a scorpion stinging as it dies. This thing was designed by someone who wanted to make absolutely certain it couldn't be removed. So what can you do? Kellerman hesitated, which was terrifying, because Kellerman had trained at Walter Reed and spent 4 years in the worst combat theaters the war had produced. Kellerman did not hesitate. There's one option, he said slowly. The parasite feeds on Dominion biology, specifically her protein markers, her copper-based blood. If I can fundamentally alter her blood chemistry so drastically that the parasite thinks the host is already dead, it will go dormant, hibernate, and in that window, maybe 10 seconds, I can physically extract it. Then do it. Major, the only way to alter her blood chemistry that fast is a massive cross-species transfusion. We flood her system with human blood, packed with synthetic adrenaline and radiation scrubbers. Human blood is iron-based. Hers is copper-based. The biochemical conflict alone could stop her heart. Declan looked at the glowing green parasite on the hologram, pulsing, patient, counting down. If you do nothing, we all die in 65 hours and 42 minutes. Then it's not a question. It's a math problem. And the math says try. Kellerman nodded. The nod that says I agree, but I want it on record that this might kill her. Before they could move, the door opened. General Maddox walked in. He didn't sit down. Maddox never sat down in rooms where he intended to deliver orders that people wouldn't like. Sitting implied negotiation. Standing implied finality. I've read Dr. Kellerman's preliminary report, Maddox said. No preamble, no softening, just the words, hard and clean like bullets. Good, Declan said. Then you know we need to prep the surgical bay immediately. That's not what I know, Major. The room went cold. What I know, Maddox continued, quiet, measured, is that there is a localized antimatter device on my ship, attached to a Dominion national of no strategic value, with a 66-hour countdown, and that the proposed surgery has an estimated survival rate of, what was it? Doctor. Kellerman looked at the floor. 30 to 40%, which means a 60 to 70% chance that the surgery fails. And if it fails, If her heart stops during the procedure and the fail-safe interprets cardiac arrest as a trigger event, this ship, my ship, and every soul on it, ceases to exist. He looked at Declan. There is a simpler solution. Put the girl in an escape pod, launch it into open space, detonate at safe distance. One life, 3,000 saved, problem solved. And there it was. The math. Clean, surgical, rational. The kind of math that Declan himself had done 8 months ago at Kessler 9 when he had weighed acceptable losses against strategic objectives and decided that 47 unknown people in an unconfirmed building were an acceptable risk. Except this time, the acceptable loss had a name and silver eyes and had tested a door lock 5 times to make sure safety was real. No, Maddox raised an eyebrow. That's not a counter-argument. Major, that's a reflex. She's under my protection. I claimed her under the right of spoils. She is legally my responsibility, and I am not loading her into a torpedo tube. 3,000 lives. I know the number. Your men, your crew, the people who trust you to make rational decisions. I know who they are. Then act like it. Declan pushed off the wall, took a step forward. Present, filling the space between them with something that wasn't quite defiance, but was close. 8 months ago, Declan said, and his voice was different now. Lower, rougher, like something being dragged across gravel. I sat in a command chair and made rational decisions. I weighed the numbers. Acceptable losses. Strategic value. I did the math. And 47 people burned alive in a building I destroyed. Maddox's jaw tightened. You cleared me, sir. The tribunal cleared me. But I hear them. Every night. I hear them every single night. So don't stand there and tell me about rational decisions. Because I have been making rational decisions. And rational decisions are the reason I can't sleep. Silence. The fluorescent lights hummed. The ventilation system breathed. She's a person, Declan said. Not a variable. Not collateral. A person. And I will not sacrifice her because the math is convenient. If the surgery fails and we all die, then we die trying to save someone. And that is a better death than anything this war has offered us so far. Maddox stared at him. For a long time. Then he reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a folded document, set it on the table. Sign that. A liability waiver. Full responsibility transfer. If the surgery failed and the bomb detonated, Major Declan Hale accepted sole culpability for the loss of the USS Valiant and all personnel aboard. It was, essentially, a pre-written confession to the deaths of 3,000 people. Declan picked up the pen, signed it, didn't hesitate, didn't read the fine print, didn't blink. Maddox took the document, folded it, put it back in his pocket. You have 12 hours, he said. If she's not clean by then, I launch the pod myself, and that is not a negotiation. He left. Kellerman let out a breath he'd been holding for what felt like minutes. You just signed your own court-martial. Major, I know. Declan was already walking toward the door. Prep the surgical bay. I need to go tell a girl I barely know that I'm about to gamble her life on a 30-70 chance. The surgical bay was cold. Not metaphorically cold, physically cold. The temperature had been dropped to 58 degrees to slow Elara's Dominion metabolism and give the medical team an extra margin of safety. The operating table was a slab of white composite surrounded by articulated robotic arms and holographic scanners that cast everything in a pale blue glow. Elara lay face down on the table. Her gray dress had been replaced by a medical gown, paper thin. Her curved spine was exposed. The scar tissue from years of untreated degeneration visible under the harsh surgical lights. She was shivering. From fear, Declan stood beside the table, in scrubs, which looked absurd on him, like putting a dinner jacket on a tank. My blood type is O negative, he had told Kellerman 20 minutes ago, rolling up his sleeve before anyone asked. Universal donor on Earth. Will it work? Human blood is iron-based. Hers is copper. It's like pouring gasoline into a diesel engine and hoping the car drives instead of explodes. But it might work. It might. Then hook me up. So now, one arm was extended, strapped to an IV line, thick plastic tubing connecting his vein directly to Elara's. His blood, the blood of the conqueror, about to be pumped into the body of the conquered. There was a poetry to it that Declan didn't have time to appreciate, and probably wouldn't have appreciated anyway. Because Declan Hale did not think in poetry. He thought in problems and solutions and the space between a trigger and a bullet. But Elara saw it, even through her fear. She saw the tubing, the connection, his arm to hers, red blood to copper, enemy to enemy. And she thought, this is the strangest thing that has ever happened to me. Which, considering she had a bomb in her spine, was saying something. The immunosuppressants are loaded, Kellerman said, pulling on haptic feedback gloves. Nurse Mitchell, Neurogel, now. A young nurse with hands that were trying very hard not to shake placed a canister of shimmering gel beside the surgical array. Major? Kellerman looked at Declan. When I start the transfusion, it will be the most painful thing she has ever experienced. Human red blood cells carry iron. Her system runs on copper. The biochemical conflict will feel like her blood is on fire. I heard you the first time. I need her to not panic. If her heart rate spikes past 180, the parasite may trigger before we can extract it. You are her anchor. Do you understand? It means if she looks at me and sees fear, we all die. Correct. Declan looked down at Elara. She was tracing a scratch in the composite with her fingernail. Elara. She looked up. Her silver eyes were wet, but steady. Steadier than they had any right to be. I'm scared, she said, simply, without drama, the way you state a fact. I know. If I die on this table, will you promise me something? You're not going to promise me that you will not blame yourself. He couldn't promise that. They both knew it. I'll try, he said. She almost smiled. That is more than my father ever offered. Kellerman's voice cut through. Beginning transfusion in 3, 2, 1. The machines engaged. A low, violent hum that vibrated through the table and into the floor. And human blood, rich and red and packed with iron and synthetic adrenaline and combat-grade stimulants, began pumping directly into the alien princess's body. The first second, nothing. The second, a tremor. The third second, Elara opened her mouth and screamed. It wasn't a human scream. It was higher, thinner, a frequency that hit something primal in every person in the room. The sound of biology being violated at the molecular level, of copper meeting iron in a war that played out inside every blood vessel simultaneously. Her back arched, her fingers clawed at the table. The holographic monitor above her spine exploded in red and yellow alerts. The parasitic mass, confused, agitated, began burrowing deeper, its green glow intensifying. Hold her down, Kellerman shouted. The parasite is reacting. It's trying to dig in. Declan threw his upper body across hers, pinning her shoulders to the table. His face inches from hers. Her skin was burning. Unnatural. Wrong. Elara, stay with me. Her eyes were wild. Rolling. It burns. My spine. I know. Look at me. Don't look at the lights. Don't listen to the machines. Look at my eyes. She locked onto him. Gray eyes meeting silver. Two broken people staring at each other across the smallest distance in the universe. The monitor screamed. Heart rate climbing. 140, 150, 160. We're losing the window, Kellerman yelled. If she hits 180. You won't hit 180, Declan said to her. Only to her. Because I've seen what you're made of. And it's stronger than this. 165, 162, 158, holding. It's working. Kellerman was bent over the holographic display. The iron content is disrupting its protein recognition. It's releasing, detaching from the spinal column, entering hibernation. The green glow dimmed. The pulsing slowed. The mechanical tendrils, one by one, began to retract from her nerve clusters. I have a window. 10 seconds. Kellerman grabbed the laser scalpel. His hands were absolutely still. Surgeon's hands, trained for moments exactly like this. He cut, precise, Clean, a single incision through the lower back, through muscle and tissue and the biosynthetic membrane the parasite had woven around itself. 8 seconds. He reached in with heavy surgical forceps, found the mass, gripped it, 5 seconds, and pulled. The parasite came free with a sound that nobody in the room would ever forget. A wet, sucking, tearing sound, like something alive being ripped from something it had been feeding on. Kellerman spun, hurled the pulsing green mass into a shielded biocontainment cylinder, slammed the lock. The cylinder hissed, sealed. The light inside went dark. For 1 second, the room was silent. Then the heart monitor flatlined. A single, continuous, high-pitched tone. It doesn't waver, doesn't stutter, just screams. One note, the sound of a heart that has looked at all the available options and chosen none of them. It filled the surgical bay, bounced off the white walls, drilled into every skull in the room, and erased, in one instant, every bit of triumph they had felt 3 seconds ago when the bomb came free. Because the bomb was out. But Elara was gone. Cardiac arrest. Nurse Mitchell grabbed the defibrillator paddles. The human blood is overwhelming her system. Clear. Kellerman pressed the paddles to her chest. The shock jolted her body off the table. It fell back. Flat. Charged to 250. Clear. Again. The terrible mechanical violence of electricity forced into a body that has decided to quit. Flat. Declan stood there, his arms still strapped to the IV line, his blood still pumping into a woman whose heart had stopped beating. And he felt every single one of his 47 ghosts crowd into the room, not accusing, not angry, waiting to see if he would lose another one. "Come on, them," he said. His voice cracked, split right down the middle. "Don't let him win. Don't you let your father win." Charging to 300. Clear. The third shock was brutal. Her whole body convulsed, lifted, hung in the air for a fraction of a second, fell. Silence. 1 second. Then, beep, weak, stuttering, beep, stronger, beep, 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 rhythmic, steady. A heart that had looked at the dark and decided, no, not yet. Kellerman sagged against the surgical console. His gloves were covered in copper-green blood and something that glowed faintly. He was too busy remembering to breathe to care. Nurse Mitchell sat down on the floor, right there on the cold tile, knees to her chest, because her legs had decided they were done. Declan pulled his arm free from the IV, pressed a gauze pad against the needle mark, and stood there, staring at the heart monitor, at the small, green, beautiful peaks that meant Elara was alive. His hand was shaking. He let it. He pulled a metal chair to the side of her bed, sat down, reached over and placed his hand gently over hers, not holding, just resting, a point of contact, a tether, so that when she woke up, the first thing she felt would not be alone. He didn't intend to fall asleep, but his body had been running on adrenaline and guilt and bad coffee for 47 hours. And now, with the bomb removed and the monitor beeping steady and the warmth of her hand under his body simply quit. His chin dropped to his chest, his breathing slowed, and for the first time in 8 months, Declan Hale slept without dreaming of fire. Elara drifted, not awake, not asleep, somewhere in between, where memories live, where the people you used to be wait for you in empty hallways. She was 9 again, standing outside the medical wing. The hallway was white, clean, smelling of chemicals. Her father's voice came through the door, muffled, but clear enough. "Don't fix it. If it cannot stand on its own spine, then its spine has spoken. It, not she, not her, not my daughter. It," the word echoed, bounced off the white walls, multiplied, became a chorus. She had lived inside that word for 15 years, built a house in it, furnished it with silence and lowered eyes, and the particular talent of making herself so small that nobody noticed when she entered a room, or left it. But now, in this space between alive and dead, something was different. Another voice, deeper, rough, with a crack in it that sounded like it had been broken and glued back together too many times. You are not a mistake. She didn't recognize it at first, because nobody had ever said those words to her. You are not a weapon. You are going to live. The white hallway began to change. The chemical smell faded, replaced by antiseptic, steel, machine oil, the smell of the USS Valiant, the smell of a place that was ugly and functional and didn't care about elegance, that cared about survival. Elara opened her eyes. The medical bay lights had been dimmed, the frantic chaos of the surgery replaced by a low, steady hum of monitoring equipment. Somewhere, a ventilation fan clicked softly, over and over. She was lying on her back, blanket pulled up to her chest, the wool blanket from Declan's quarters. Someone had brought it down, and then she noticed it, the absence, for her entire life, every waking moment. There had been a pain, low, grinding, constant, in her lower spine and radiating down her left leg. It was so much a part of her that she had stopped thinking of it as pain and started thinking of it as herself. It was gone. She moved her left leg, carefully, expecting the old resistance, the grinding, the sharp electric jolt. The leg moved, smooth, painless, free. She moved it again, bent the knee, straightened it. The motion was so fluid, so ordinary, so unremarkable, that it broke her. Because it shouldn't have been remarkable. Every person in the galaxy bent their knee without thinking about it. Every child ran without calculating the cost. Every woman walked without gripping a cane and counting the steps to the nearest wall. But Elara had spent 15 years mapping every room by its furniture, measuring distances between chairs, memorizing which corridors had handrails, planning every step like a military operation. And now, her leg just moved. She sat up, looked at her hands. They were trembling, but not from weakness, from fury. She looked down at her legs, straight, even, both feet flat on the mattress. For 15 years, she had slept on her right side because sleeping on her back put pressure on the damaged vertebrae. For 15 years, she had swung her legs out of bed, left side first, because that was the side the cane was on. For 15 years, she had dressed sitting down because standing to pull on trousers required balance she didn't have. Every single day, for 15 years, her body had been a puzzle she had to solve before she could do anything. Walk to the bathroom, climb a stair, carry a plate. The simplest acts of living required planning and pain and the constant low-grade humiliation of being slower than everyone around her. And now, her leg just moved. Her father had the technology to do this. The Dominion's medical cast could have fixed her when she was 9. The doctor had said it, treatable, entirely treatable. 6 weeks of recovery. But the purity laws said no, because using machines to repair a body was an admission that the body was flawed. And flawed bodies were not tolerated. They were hidden, discarded, kept in basements, to graft a bomb into her spine. Though, that was acceptable. The laws weren't about purity. They had never been about purity. They were about control, about deciding which bodies mattered and which didn't, about keeping people like Elara grateful for the scraps, quiet, invisible. And she had been quiet for 24 years. She had been quiet when Serafina mocked her limp at court dinners, quiet when Isolde pretended she didn't exist, quiet when her father walked ahead of her, always ahead, never beside, quiet when the servants whispered poor thing and the nobles whispered defective, and the children in the market threw stones and she smiled and said nothing, because saying something would mean admitting it hurt. She had been so beautifully, perfectly, obediently quiet. And the universe had rewarded her silence by putting a bomb in her spine. So, no, not anymore. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, placed both feet on the floor, pushed herself upright, and for one dizzying, extraordinary, terrifying second, she stood, straight, without a cane, without a wall, without calculating the distance to the nearest piece of furniture. She just stood, the way everyone else in the galaxy stood, without thinking about it. And she felt, in that moment, not gratitude, not relief, rage, 24 years of rage, stacked and compressed and heated until it turned into something new, something with a spine of its own, something that stood perfectly straight, a voice from the shadows. It's the human medtech. Elara, startled, turned her head. General Maddox, the supreme commander of Earth's forces, stepped into the dim light. Dr. Kellerman had to rebuild 3 of your vertebrae, he said. His voice was low, not out of tenderness, but because Declan was asleep in the chair beside her bed in Maddox. Despite everything, respected sleep. He had seen too many men go without it. High-used carbon fiber synthetics, combined with the human blood transfusion, your body went into a regenerative overdrive. Your own people's doctors refused to do this because it wasn't elegant. Earth doctors don't care about elegant. We care about alive. Elara looked at her hands, opened them, closed them, feeling the strength in her fingers. I am fixed. You're upgraded, princess. And for the first time, something in his tone shifted, a grudging acknowledgement. Then his face hardened again, because Maddox was not a man who stayed soft for long. But we have a bigger problem. We analyzed the bomb. Earth Command in Geneva has reviewed the data. That device was armed by a remote command signal originating from King Aldrich's personal command bunker on the planet's surface. Time-stamped, authenticated, irrefutable. Declan stirred. His eyes opened with instant clarity. He saw Maddox, stood, saluted. At ease! Maddox waved him down. Geneva confirmed it. The assassination attempt constitutes supreme treachery. The armistice is officially void. Earth Command has ordered immediate resumption of hostilities. The words hung in the air. The war, which had ended 12 hours ago, was starting again. What's the plan? Declan asked. Maddox walked to the viewport, looked out at the planet below, the capital city still scarred and smoking. Clean option, orbital kinetic strike, 6 dreadnoughts in formation, concentrated bombardment on the palace compound and the deep bunker. We can level it in 40 minutes. No ground casualties on our side. How many civilians in the bunker complex? Declan asked. Maddox didn't answer immediately. The deep vault extends 3 miles below the palace. Kellerman offered quietly from across the room. Our surveys show residential infrastructure, palace staff, maintenance crews. How many? Declan repeated. 400, give or take. Declan looked at Maddox. 400 civilians. Collateral damage, Maddox said, still facing the viewport. Acceptable losses for a confirmed high-value target. Collateral damage. The exact phrase, the 2 words that had haunted Declan for 8 months. He heard himself saying them at Kessler 9, leaning over a tactical console. What's the collateral estimate? And the intelligence officer saying minimal, and Declan saying proceed, and then 47 people ceasing to exist. He looked at Maddox, and he saw himself, 8 months younger, 8 months less broken. No, Declan said. Maddox turned from the viewport. Slowly. 400 people in that bunker didn't start this war. They're servants, workers, the same people Aldrich left to die when the bombs fell. We don't get to kill them because it's convenient. This isn't about convenience, Major. It's about ending a war. Then we end it on the ground. We go in. We extract Aldrich. We bring him to Geneva alive. Maddox stared at him. A ground assault on the deep vault is suicide. 50,000 casualties to breach the main entrance. Tri-phase energy shield. 3 miles of reinforced titanium. Then we don't use the front door. Both men turned. Elara was standing. She had swung her legs over the side of the medical bed, placed her bare feet on the cold metal floor, and risen, straight, unaided, shorter than both men by more than a foot. But in that moment, in that dim medical bay, she was the largest person in the room. My entire life, Elara said, and her voice was different. The fragile whisper was gone, replaced by something forged, tempered in the fire of a surgery that had killed her and brought her back. My family treated me like a ghost. I lived in the walls of that palace, in the basements, in the service tunnels. She took a step forward, then another. No limp, no cane, no hesitation. Because I was invisible. They never hid anything from me. Why would you hide secrets from furniture? I know the subterranean maintenance tunnels. I know the geothermal exhaust vents. And I know the master bypass codes for the triphase energy shield. She paused. Let the silence work. My sister Serafina was responsible for memorizing the emergency override protocols. She found the task tedious, so she ordered me to learn them instead. Every week, she would quiz me, and if I got a single digit wrong, she would not speak to me for days, which, for me, was the closest thing to peace I ever had. Something almost like a smile, bitter, sharp, gone before it fully formed. Override code Alpha Tango 79 Omega, I have recited it 4,000 times. Maddox was looking at her with an expression Declan had never seen on the general's face. Recalculation. A chess player who has just noticed a piece on the board that he thought was a pawn and realized it was a queen. You can get us inside the shield, Maddox asked. I can walk you through the front door of my father's bunker, through tunnels his own guards consider beneath them. She looked at Declan, then back at Maddox. But I have conditions. You're not in a position to negotiate. Princess, I am the only person alive who knows those tunnels. So yes, I am in exactly that position. Name them, Maddox said. The 400 servants in the bunker complex. They come out first. Before Aldrich. Before my sisters. Before your soldiers fire a single shot. Those people did not choose this war. They do not deserve to die in it. And I go with you. On the ground. In the tunnels. I am not staying on this ship while other people fight my war. Maddox looked at Declan. Your asset. Your call. Declan looked at Elara. At the woman who had been a ghost. Who had been a bomb. Who had died on an operating table and come back. Standing. For the first time in her life. Barefoot on a cold metal floor. Telling a 4-star general what the terms were. She goes, Declan said. She's the only one who knows the way. Maddox held Elara's gaze. Then he nodded. Once. Sharp. You have 6 hours to plan the insertion. I want a full tactical brief on my desk by 0400. And Princess. She waited. If your codes are wrong, or if this is a trap, I will not need a bomb to end you. Perfectly clear, General. Maddox left. The room was quiet again. Just the beeping of monitors and the hum of the ship's engines and 2 people standing in the half-dark. You should sit down, Declan said. You just came back from the dead 4 hours ago. I have been sitting down for 24 years. Declan. Elara walked to the viewport, stood there, looking at the planet that had never wanted her. I think I would like to stand for a while. I watched her, silhouetted against the stars, straight-backed, barefoot, alive. The medical gown hung loose on her thin frame. Her silver hair was matted and streaked with something that might have been sweat or tears. The scar on her neck was livid against her pale skin. She was not beautiful by any standard that measured beauty in symmetry and proportion and the absence of damage. But Declan had seen beautiful. He had seen Serafina's nuclear perfection. And he had seen this woman drag wounded strangers through a collapsing building on a leg that didn't work. He knew which one mattered more. And somewhere on the far side of the room, near the door, in the shadows, Sergeant Voss stood perfectly still. I had been assigned to guard the medical bay during the surgery. Standard security protocol. He had stood there for 9 hours, through the screaming, through the flatlining, through the paddles and the counting and the cracking of Declan's voice when he begged her not to die. And during the quiet hours, while Elara slept and Declan dozed and the nurses rotated shifts, Voss had looked at the medical display screen, the patient file. He hadn't meant to read it, but the screen was right there, and the data was scrolling, and he saw it. Fracture. Left radius, age 7, untreated. Fracture. Right clavicle, age 9, untreated. Fracture. 3rd and 4th ribs, age 11. Noted as disciplinary action. Malnutrition markers. Chronic. Consistent with restricted feeding over extended period. Plasma burn scarring. Left neck. Age 14. Origin reclassified as punitive measure by royal household. Punitive. They had burned her. On purpose. When she was 14, Voss had read the list. All of it. Every fracture, every scar, every clinical notation that tried to make violence sound medical. And he had thought about Tommy. Tommy, who was 12 when their father broke his arm for the first time. Tommy, who was 15 when he ran away. Tommy, who was 17 when he enlisted because the military was safer than home. Tommy, who was 22 when a Dominion plasma strike turned him into a memory and a folded flag. Tommy, who had also been a broken thing that nobody fixed. And Voss had spent 2 years hating the Dominion for killing Tommy, 2 years of grinding his teeth and volunteering for every dangerous mission because danger was easier than grief. 2 years of telling himself that every Dominion life was the enemy. Because if he allowed exceptions, if he allowed the possibility that some of them were victims too, then the hate would crack, and the hate was the only thing holding him together. But here was this girl, this broken, burned, starved girl, whose own father had hurt her the way Voss's father had hurt Tommy, whose bones had been broken the same number of times, whose body had been a war zone long before any actual war started. She was Dominion. Tommy was human. And somehow their medical files read like the same story written in 2 different languages. Voss walked to the supply cabinet, took a cup, filled it with water from the small sink, all the way to the top, the way Tommy used to like it, so full you had to be careful carrying it. He set it on the table beside Elara's bed. She didn't see him do it. She was at the viewport, looking at stars, standing on 2 legs that worked. Voss returned to his post by the door, arms crossed, jaw clenched, eyes burning, not with hate, not anymore, with something much worse, recognition. The understanding that pain is pain, regardless of the color of the blood it draws, that a father's fist lands the same way whether the skin beneath it is pearl white or sun brown or copper flushed. Voss stood in the dark, and for the first time in 2 years, he didn't think about killing Dominion. He thought about Tommy, and he thought about a girl with a crooked spine who had spent her whole life being invisible, and who was now, finally, standing up. In 6 hours, they would plan the assault. In 12 hours, they would drop into the fire. In 24 hours, Elara would walk back into her father's house. Not as a ghost, not as a bomb, not as a stain on the bloodline, as something the Dominion had never seen, something King Aldrich had never imagined, something that Serafina and Isolde and the Golden Court and the purity laws and 24 years of cruelty had failed. Completely, utterly, spectacularly failed to destroy. A woman who knew exactly what she was worth and was done, absolutely done, waiting for anyone else to agree. 14 hours after the surgery, 6 hours after the tactical briefing, 2 hours before the drop. The armor didn't fit right. Of course, it didn't. It was built for human soldiers. Men and women with thick bones and dense muscle and the particular stubbornness of a species that had crawled out of mud and somehow ended up conquering stars. The smallest set they had in the armory was a light infantry rig designed for a female reconnaissance specialist who stood 5'4" and weighed 120 pounds. Elara was 5'1", and after a lifetime of restricted feeding in a palace basement, she weighed 93. But Dr. Kellerman's team had spent 4 hours modifying it, trimming the plating, adjusting the servos, rerouting the power cells. The result was a matte black suit of articulated armor that hugged her body like a second skeleton. The advanced servos moved in perfect synchronization with her newly repaired spine. Carbon fiber and titanium and human engineering, wrapped around an alien princess who had never worn anything heavier than a gray cotton dress. She stood in the armory, looking at herself in the reflection of a polished blast shield. She didn't recognize the person looking back. The woman in the reflection had straight posture, both feet flat on the ground, shoulders level, even, aligned. The plasma scar on her neck was visible above the collar of the armor, but it looked different now, not like a wound, like a badge. She reached for the chest plate's clasps. Her fingers fumbled, too nervous, too unfamiliar. A hand appeared, large, scarred, steady, Declan, standing beside her, not in front, not behind, beside, the way her father had never stood. He adjusted the shoulder strap, tightened the magnetic clasps at her collarbone. His fingers were careful, precise. "Weight okay?" he asked. "It is heavier than I expected." "You'll get used to it." "I am not sure I want to get used to it." He almost smiled at that. Almost. Fair point. On her hip, they holstered a standard-issue Earth sidearm. She had never held a weapon, had never been trained, because ghosts don't fight, ghosts just watch. But she wasn't a ghost anymore. Declan racked the bolt on his kinetic rifle. The sound was sharp, clean, final. "Nervous?" he asked. She strapped the tactical helmet under her chin, looked up at him, and her silver eyes, which had spent 24 years staring at floors, were level, clear, burning with something that had no name in the Dominion language, because the Dominion had never needed a word for it. Defiance. "They threw me to the wolves." "Declan," she said, "they just didn't realize the wolves would teach me how to bite." The hangar bay of the USS Valiant was chaos. Beautiful chaos. Loading mechs stomped across the grated deck. Fuel lines hissed. The smell of ozone and weapon-grade propellants hung in the recycled air. The Iron Wolves, Declan's elite strike team, 24 soldiers, the best of the worst. Men and women who had survived 7 years of a war that had chewed up entire battalions and spat out bones. Sergeant Voss was among them. I had volunteered. Nobody had asked him to. After 9 hours in the medical bay, after the water glass, after the file, he had walked to Declan's quarters at 0300 hours and knocked. "I'm going," he had said. No explanation. Declan had looked at him for a long time, then nodded. Now Voss stood at the edge of the ramp, rifle across his chest. His face was the same stone mask it always was. But his eyes, when they found Elara across the hangar, were different. Something had shifted behind the concrete. A crack, a fracture line, through which something warm and terrible was leaking. Elara walked toward the dropship, and the entire hangar noticed. Not because she was alien, not because she was royal, but because of how she moved. No cane, no limp, no apology. 300 human soldiers watched the Dominion princess walk through their midst, and not one of them looked away. "Listen up, Iron Wolves." Declan's voice cut through the noise. "This is a surgical decapitation strike. We drop down the planet's geothermal exhaust shaft directly into the maintenance catacombs. We disable the energy shield. We extract King Aldrich alive. He goes to Geneva. He goes to trial." He paused, looked at Elara, then back. "But before any of that, we get 400 civilians out. Servants, workers, people who didn't start this war and don't deserve to die in it. Princess Elara will guide us. She knows the layout. She knows the codes. And she has more right to be on this drop than any of us. Treat her accordingly." The Iron Wolves slammed their fists into their chests. A single thunderous impact. Elara stepped onto the ramp, looked back at the massive warship that had saved her life, then turned forward, into the red combat light of the dropship's cabin. The ramp sealed shut behind her. Fire. That was the first thing, and the second thing, and the third. The dropship plummeted down the geothermal exhaust shaft like a bullet fired into the throat of the planet. Heat alarms screamed. The exterior viewports glowed orange, then red, then white. Inside the cabin, the Iron Wolves sat in their crash harnesses, silent, rifles locked between their knees, helmets sealed. Elara stood near the cockpit door, because sitting down felt wrong. After 24 years of sitting, standing felt like the only prayer she had left. "Pull up, Vector 4. Her voice came through the comms, calm, precise. "Thrusters at maximum. Now." Gravity slammed into them. The ship decelerated violently, smashed through a rusted industrial grate, and crashed onto the floor of a massive, forgotten, subterranean cavern. The loading ramp dropped. Declan was out first, rifle up. The air hit him like a wall, warm, wet, heavy with the smell of mineral deposits and sulfur and ancient stone. The cavern stretched out in every direction. Columns of natural rock rose from the floor like the ribs of some buried giant. Water dripped from the ceiling in a steady, echoing rhythm. The only light came from bioluminescent moss clinging to the walls in patches of pale green and blue. It was beautiful, in the way that places untouched by civilization are always beautiful. Before civilization arrives and ruins them, the Iron Wolves flooded out behind him with brutal, choreographed efficiency. Every soldier found their position in 3 seconds. Rifles up, sectors covered, eyes scanning the dark. Elara stepped off the ramp. Her boots hit stone. The servos in her armor adjusted automatically, compensating for the uneven ground, the slight incline, the moisture on the rock. She had walked these caves barefoot, as a child, exploring the tunnels beneath the palace when nobody was looking. When her sisters were at banquets and her father was at court, and the servants thought she was in her room. She had spent hundreds of hours down here, mapping, memorizing, learning the underground geography of a palace that didn't want her. She had done it because it was the only exploration available to her, the only adventure, the only freedom. While other princesses learned to dance and strategize and command, Elara learned the maintenance tunnels, the service hatches, the forgotten corridors. It had seemed so pointless at the time. It didn't seem pointless now. She pointed toward a massive reinforced blast door covered in decades of dust and luminescent moss. Secondary maintenance airlock. It connects to the outer ring of the deep vault. My father's guards won't be watching it. These tunnels are for servants, and servants are invisible. Declan signaled. Move. They moved. 20 minutes through the catacombs. The air grew colder. The rough stone walls gave way to polished titanium, every surface smooth, every corner sharp, every corridor straight. The Dominion built the way they lived, without curves, without softness, without anything that might suggest mercy. Elara led them through the labyrinth, turning where the corridors branched, ducking through service hatches that hadn't been opened in years. Then, halfway through, she stopped. The corridor branched, left toward the deep vault, right toward the lower service quarters, where the servants lived, where 400 people were locked in by blast doors that had sealed automatically when the war restarted. Elara stood at the junction. The team stopped behind her, waiting. The vault is left, she said. 15 minutes, straight shot. Then she pointed right. The servant quarters are that way. 20 minutes, through the old water treatment tunnels. There's a manual release on the blast doors. I've used it before. When I was 14, I snuck food to the kitchen workers during a lockdown because my father had ordered rations cut as punishment for a burned dinner. She looked at Declan. If we go left, we get Aldrich, fast, clean, but the servants stay locked in. And if something goes wrong, those 400 people die behind a door that somebody could have opened. Declan understood, immediately. The same calculation, the same math, mission first or people first. If we split, he said slowly, we lose half our firepower at the vault. I know. The Royal Guard at the bridge will be a problem with a reduced squad. I know. And the servant quarters might have guards too. They won't. Guards are assigned to protect valuable things. Servants are not considered valuable. That sentence, said without bitterness, just flat fact, hit harder than any plasma bolt. Declan was done making decisions that manuals approved of. Voss, take 6. Go with the princess to the servant quarters. Get those doors open. Get those people out. Rendezvous at the bridge in 20 minutes. Voss looked at him, then at Elara, the woman he had called thing in a corridor 30 hours ago. Copy that, sir. No hesitation. Elara led Voss and 6 Iron Wolves down the right corridor, moving fast. Behind her, 6 human soldiers followed a Dominion princess through tunnels built for Dominion servants. They reached the servant quarters in 18 minutes. The blast doors were sealed. Emergency protocol. Red lights blinking. Behind the door, Elara could hear them. Muffled voices. Hundreds. Scared. Hungry. Waiting for someone to remember they existed. She found the manual release. A small panel hidden behind a maintenance hatch. Exactly where she remembered. She pulled the lever. The hydraulics groaned. Ancient. Stiff. But functional. The doors cracked open. 400 faces stared out at her. Dominion servants. Cooks. Cleaners. Maintenance workers, the people who scrubbed the floors and washed the robes and received nothing in return except the privilege of being allowed to exist. They saw her armor, Earth's insignia. They flinched. Then they saw her face, the scar, the silver hair. Princess Elara, a woman, old, gray, the head cook. She had snuck Elara extra bread when she was 12. You're walking. I am walking, Elara said, and I am getting you out. All of you. Follow the soldiers. They will take you to the surface. You are safe. I promise you. On everything I am, you are safe. The old cook stared at the impossible sight of the broken princess who used to steal bread from the kitchen, standing straight, in enemy armor, coming back for them. She cried, and then 400 people began to move, quietly, quickly, following the Iron Wolves toward the surface. Elara watched them go, every face. Then she turned and ran back toward the bridge, the choke point, a vast underground chasm, black, bottomless, spanning the void. A single metallic bridge, narrow, unrailed, on the far side. The triphase energy shield shimmered blue-white, and behind it, the primary blast doors of the deep vault. 12 Dominion royal guards in golden armor stood at attention, plasma halberds, perfect posture, faces carved from stone, selected for genetic purity and combat excellence and unwavering loyalty. They had never fought humans. Elara rejoined the main squad at the bridge, Voss with her, covered in dust from the servant tunnels, the screams of 400 grateful people still ringing in his ears. Snipers, Declan whispered over the squad net. 3 targets, lead guards. 3 suppressed kinetic rounds cracked through the cavern. Sharp, precise, the sound of physics doing exactly what it does when you accelerate a depleted uranium slug to 3 times the speed of sound and point it at golden armor designed for ceremony rather than survival. 3 guards dropped. Chaos erupted. The remaining guards scrambled, took cover. Plasma fire lit up the bridge. Blue bolts, blinding, superheated. Covering fire, Declan roared. The Iron Wolves unleashed everything. A sustained barrage that pinned the Dominion elite behind their own barriers. Go, Elara. She ran, and Voss ran with her. Not because Declan told him to, but because somewhere between reading her medical file and opening those blast doors and watching 400 people walk free because a crippled princess had demanded it, something inside Voss had shifted. Permanently. How was faster, bigger. His combat armor was heavier and his stride was longer. He positioned himself between Elara and the heaviest plasma fire, using his body as a wall. The first hit, he absorbed. The armor held. The second hit, he staggered, kept moving. The third hit broke through. A plasma bolt punched through the weakened chest plate just below the right collarbone. The impact spun him sideways. He dropped to one knee. His rifle clattered across the bridge. Voss, Declan's voice, distant, desperate. Voss wasn't looking at Declan. He was looking at Elara, who had stopped running, who was turning back. Don't stop, Voss growled through his teeth. Blood, human red, bright against his gray armor. The code. Go. I'm not leaving you on this. I said go. She went. Because his eyes in that moment weren't angry, weren't hateful. They were the eyes of someone who knew what it meant to be broken, who knew what it meant to be left behind, and who had decided, on this bridge, over this abyss, that he would not leave behind someone else. Elara slid into cover beside the shield generator console. Her fingers found the holographic keypad. Seraphina's voice echoed from years ago. Mocking, bored. Memorize it. Little Shadow. You are good for nothing else. Override code Alpha Tango 79 Omega, Elara whispered. She punched in the final sequence. The triphase energy shield. 3 miles of shimmering blue protection. Flickered, whined, and violently collapsed. Shield is down. Breach. Declan hurled a shaped thermal charge at the titanium blast doors. The explosion rocked the cavern. The doors blew inward in a shower of molten metal. The Iron Wolves poured through. and the Dominion Royal Guard encountered for the first time the savage, coordinated, close-quarters brutality of human shock troops. It lasted 19 seconds. Declan's medic reached Voss 11 seconds after the shield fell. He was alive. Barely. The plasma had cauterized the wound on entry. The medic sealed the breach with combat foam and dragged him behind cover. Before he lost consciousness, Voss grabbed Elara's armored wrist. His grip was weak, fading, but his eyes were clear. "I read your file," he said. "Barely there." A whisper wrapped in static. "Tommy, my brother, he had the same kind of—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Elara gripped his hand. Tight. "I know," she said softly. "I know." The medic pulled Voss away, stabilized, alive, but done fighting. Elara stood on the bridge. The shield was down, the doors were open, and ahead of her, at the end of a corridor that smelled of silk and fear, was her father. The deep vault was exactly as she remembered it. Luxurious, gilded, obscene, crystal decanters of glowing wine, silk tapestries, furniture imported across star systems at a cost that could have fed the servant caste for a decade. King Aldrich, Princess Seraphina, Princess Isolde. They huddled behind a gilded command table, pristine, clean, their silks untouched, their jewels glittering, not a speck of dust, not a drop of blood, a stark, sickening contrast to the blood and ash covering every human in the room. Declan stepped through the smoke, rifle level. Aldrich's face was white with terror, the regal authority gone, replaced by something raw, animal. "Lower your weapons," Aldrich screamed. "I am the sovereign king. You cannot do this." Declan didn't respond. He stepped aside, and from the smoke, from the same darkness that had been her home for 24 years, Elara walked forward. She pulled off her tactical helmet, dropped it on the polished floor. The sound was small, final. Her silver hair fell around her face. The plasma scar on her neck was vivid, but her spine was straight, uncompromisingly, defiantly straight. Seraphina gasped, stumbled against the command table. "Elara, how? You're walking." "I am alive," Elara said. Her voice echoed cold in the bunker. "No thanks to you." Isolde, standing beside Seraphina, said nothing, but her silver eyes, those calculating, filing eyes, were wide, and in them, for the first time, something that might have been fear, or might have been the dawning understanding that she had spent her entire life standing next to a monster and calling it father. King Aldrich stared. His eyes moved from her face to the black armor, Earth's insignia on the chest plate. "Elara, daughter." His voice tried to find warmth. Failed. "What have you done? You have betrayed your own blood. You put a bomb in my spine. Father." The room went silent. Even the Iron Wolves stopped moving. Aldrich flinched, the first honest reaction she had ever seen from him. "That was a precaution," his voice faltered. "A contingency. The Empire was at stake. I was 9 years old when I asked you to fix my spine," Elara said. Her voice cut through his like a blade. "The doctor said 6 weeks. You said no, because the purity laws mattered more than your daughter's pain." She stepped closer. "I was 14 when you burned my neck with a plasma rod, because I embarrassed you by tripping at a state dinner. You told the court it was a kitchen accident." Closer. "I was 20 when you moved me to the basement, because a visiting dignitary asked about your third daughter and you didn't want to explain." Closer. "And I was 24 when you put antimatter in my spine and sent me out of that throne room knowing I would die." She stopped, inches from him. For the first time in her life, she was taller, because he was on his knees. "But you miscalculated," she said softly. "You thought they were savages. You thought they would treat me the way you did." Another step. "They didn't." Another, they fixed me." She stopped, inches from the man who had tormented her, neglected her, broken her bones, burned her neck, starved her, erased her. "They taught me what it looks like when someone decides that a life has value. Not because it's perfect, not because it's useful, but because it exists." Aldrich opened his mouth. Declan stepped forward, grabbed the king by the silk collar, dragged him to his knees, produced heavy stasis cuffs, but Elara raised her hand. "Wait!" Declan paused. And here it was. The moment. The one she had imagined 1,000 times in the basement, on the worst nights. When the pain was so bad she couldn't sleep, and the only thing that kept her breathing was the fantasy of making him feel what she felt. She had rehearsed it for years. Monologues of fury, speeches of condemnation. She had imagined screaming, hitting, breaking things. But now that she was here, standing on two legs that worked, in armor built by the species he had tried to destroy, looking down at the most powerful man in the Dominion, she felt none of it. Not the anger, not the satisfaction. She felt tired and sad and free. "I thought about this moment for a very long time," Elara said, barely above a whisper. But in the silence, it carried. "I thought I would be happy, seeing you kneel." She looked at him, really looked. Past the crown and the robes, an old man, frightened, small, diminished, clinging to power because without it, he was nothing. "But I don't feel happy. I just feel sorry for you, because you destroyed everything you ever touched. Your empire, your legacy, your own children. And you did it because you were afraid. Afraid that if you admitted imperfection in your kingdom, in your bloodline, in your daughter, then the whole system would collapse." She leaned closer. It collapsed anyway. Serafina dropped to her knees, weeping, reaching for Elara's armored boot. "Elara, please, we are sisters. Tell them to show mercy." Elara looked down at her eldest sister, the golden child, the goddess who had mocked her and stolen her codes and called her little shadow, on her knees, mascara running, begging. Elara felt nothing, just the hollow exhaustion of someone who has carried a weight for so long that when it's finally removed, the relief doesn't feel like lightness. It feels like absence. The Dominion you knew is dead, Serafina. It died the moment you locked those blast doors and left 300 servants on the other side. Isolde had not moved, had not spoken, had not wept or begged or fallen to her knees. She stood exactly where she had been standing when the doors blew open. Back straight, hands at her sides, silver eyes wide open, taking it all in, filing. The way she had always filed everything. But her filing system had broken. Because the data didn't fit. The sister she had categorized as irrelevant, as damaged goods, as furniture, was standing in front of her in black armor, with a straight spine, giving orders to human soldiers who obeyed. And the father she had categorized as all-powerful, as untouchable, as the immovable center of her universe, was on his knees, in cuffs, with snot running down his chin. Isolde's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I didn't know," she said, quietly, "about the bomb." Elara looked at her, the middle sister, the calculating one, the one who had never been cruel, just absent, just convenient in her ignorance. "I know," Elara said, and left it at that. Because some things are not forgiven, and some things are not condemned. They are simply noted, and carried, and dealt with later. When the dust settles and the dead are buried and there is time to figure out which silences were cowardice and which were survival. She straightened, turned to Declan. "Cuff him. He goes to Geneva, to trial, public, open. So every system in this galaxy can see what happens when a civilization decides that some lives are worth less than others." Declan locked the stasis cuffs on Aldrich's wrists. "Read the charges. War crimes, violation of the armistice, attempted assassination of Earth Command, and father," Elara said, one last time, "Earth's prisons don't have silk pillows." 2 weeks later, the war was over. For real this time. The documents were signed on the deck of the USS Valiant, in the same hangar bay where Elara had first walked through the ranks of saluting soldiers. A new council was formed, joint, human and Dominion, temporary, fragile, imperfect, like most things that are worth building. It met in the hangar bay of the Valiant because it was the only space large enough and because meeting on the ship felt right. Neutral ground. Human steel and Dominion survivors sitting across from each other at folding tables that had been used for field rations 24 hours ago. The fluorescent lighting was bad. The chairs were uncomfortable. The coffee was terrible. It was the most important meeting in galactic history, and it looked like a PTA meeting in a high school gymnasium. But that was the point. The Dominion had conducted its politics in gilded chambers with stained glass ceilings and thrones carved from asteroid cores. And those politics had produced a king who put bombs in his children and left servants to die behind locked doors. Maybe politics conducted on folding chairs with bad coffee would produce something better. Elara was asked to take the crown. 3 separate delegations, Dominion moderates, Earth diplomats, even General Maddox, who had never apologized for wanting to eject her into space, but who now looked at her with something that lived in the neighborhood of respect. She refused. She stood before the council, in simple clothes, no armor, no crown, no title, just a woman with a scar on her neck and a spine made of carbon fiber. The delegates watched her, human admirals, Dominion moderates, scientists, diplomats, soldiers, doctors, the people who would have to build whatever came next. They were waiting for a queen, for a ruler. Instead, they got a woman who had spent 24 years sleeping next to a washing machine. "I do not want to rule," she said. "I have seen what ruling does. It made my father into a monster. It made my sisters into mirrors. It made an entire civilization believe that some of its people were furniture." She let the word hang. Furniture. Because she had been furniture. She had been less than furniture. Furniture gets maintained. Furniture gets repaired when it breaks. She hadn't even gotten that. "I want to build something new. Something that does not begin with the assumption that anyone is disposable." The Dominion fell because it sorted its people into categories. Perfect and imperfect. Worthy and worthless. Royal and invisible. Any system that does this, any civilization, any government, any family, will eventually destroy itself. Because you cannot build anything lasting on the idea that some of the bricks don't matter. She looked at the delegates, human, Dominion, side by side, for the first time. "No one is garbage," she said. "That is the only law I care about. Build everything else around that." The room was quiet. The silence of people realizing they've been overcomplicating things for a very long time. And then, one person began to clap. Sergeant Voss. 3rd row, right arm in a sling, chest bandaged under his dress uniform. His face was still granite, but he was clapping, slowly, steadily, with his one good hand, and then another person joined, and another, until the hangar base shook with the sound. She found Declan afterward. He was in the observation deck, alone, standing at the viewport, looking at the stars the way people look at them when they're seeing something inside instead. She stood beside him. Not in front, not behind, beside. They were quiet for a while. The warm, full quiet between two people who have been through something together that cannot be explained to anyone who wasn't there. "You saved my life," she said. "You saved 400 servants. That's not the same thing." "No," he agreed. "It's better." She smiled. Small, real. The first smile that had ever reached her silver eyes without pain underneath it. "You chose me," she said, "because you were punishing yourself." I said that. On the first night, I remember. I was right. "Yeah." He exhaled. "You were. But you need to hear something, and I need you to actually listen. Not with your soldier brain. Not with the part that calculates threats and signs liability waivers. With the other part, the part that sat in a chair and held my hand while I was dying." He turned to face her. "You chose to save me," Elara said. "When your general told you to sacrifice me, you said no. When the surgery could have killed us all, you said try. When they wanted to bomb the bunker from orbit, you said not the civilians." She held his gaze, silver eyes, steady, luminous, looking at him with understanding, the kind that goes past words, past language, past species. You spent 8 months believing you are a man who kills people. But that is not what I saw. What I saw on that drone footage, in the throne room, on the operating table, in the tunnels, is a man who chooses to save, every single time, even when it costs him everything. Her voice dropped, almost to a whisper. 47 people died because of bad intelligence, not because of a bad man. You are not defined by the worst order you ever gave. Declan, you are defined by every choice you made after. He didn't say anything. Because the thing she had just done with a few quiet sentences was something that no tribunal, no therapist, no pill bottle had ever managed. She had forgiven him. Not on behalf of the 47. She couldn't do that. Nobody could. But she had looked at the full accounting, the debits and the credits, the lives taken and the lives saved, and she had decided, clearly, simply, that the ledger was not what defined him. "You're going to be okay," she said. "Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually, you're going to put the pills in the drawer and leave them there." I looked at her, and his eyes were wet, which was something that Major Declan Hale of the Iron Wolves, the man who had broken the siege at Orion, who had signed a document accepting responsibility for 3,000 lives without blinking, had not allowed to happen in a very long time. "Thank you," he said, and his voice broke, just a little, "for seeing me." She recognized the words, because they were the same words she had said to him on the first night, in the room with the lock that worked from the inside. "Thank you for seeing me." It had come full circle. That night, Declan sat on the edge of his bunk. The room was dark. The ship was quiet. The war was over. On the small metal table beside his bed, a pill bottle. He picked it up, turned it over. The pills rattled inside. Small, white, familiar. He had taken 2 every night for 8 months, to push back the faces, to silence the screaming, to buy 4 or 5 hours of something that wasn't quite sleep but wasn't quite waking. Just a gray middle place where the guilt went soft and the memories went blurry and the 47 became a number instead of people. He held the bottle for a long time. Then he opened the drawer, set the bottle inside, and closed it. He lay down, pulled the blanket up, the same kind of blanket he had given Elara on her first night aboard. Thick, warm, military issue. Nothing fancy. Just enough. He thought about the 47, not the way he usually did, not the screaming, not the fire. He thought about them the way Elara had taught him to, as a debt, not a sentence, a debt he was paying, one choice at a time, one life at a time. They would never go away. He knew that. They would always be there in the quiet moments. But maybe they didn't have to be the loudest thing in the room anymore. Maybe the other things could be louder. The 400 servants walking free through tunnels they thought would be their grave. Voss's hand reaching for Elara's on a bridge over an abyss. A heart monitor that flatlined and then, against all probability, beeped again. Maybe those things could share the space. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in 8 months, Declan Hale slept. Not the gray sleep of medication, not the restless half-consciousness of a man being chased by his own history. Real sleep. Deep, dark, quiet. The kind of sleep that comes when you finally put down something you've been carrying for so long you forgot it was heavy. Outside the viewport, the stars burned, patient, indifferent, ancient. They had seen empires rise and fall, species crawl from mud and reach for light, and sometimes, find it. And somewhere on the ship, in a room with a lock that worked from the inside, a woman with a scar on her neck and a spine made of carbon fiber lay awake, looking at the stars, thinking about wolves and crowns and the strange, impossible, beautiful truth that the person who finally saw her was a broken soldier from a species she had been taught to fear. She touched the blanket, thick, warm, real. She thought about locks that work from the inside, about blankets that smell like soap, about a man who gave up his room without being asked and matched his pace to her limp without being told. She thought about a sergeant who hated her and then took a plasma bolt for her and then clapped for her with his one good hand. She thought about a doctor who didn't care about elegance, who cared about alive. She thought about 400 people walking through tunnels towards sunlight, following soldiers from a species they had been taught to fear, because a broken princess in enemy armor had opened the door and said, "You are safe." She thought about her father, on his knees, in silk, with nothing left. And she thought about herself, 9 years old, standing in a white hallway, watching her father walk away, learning to expect nothing. She was 24 now, and she was done expecting nothing. She was going to expect everything: kindness, respect, safety, dignity, not because the universe owed it to her, but because she had earned it, in the wreckage, in the cellar, on the operating table, on the bridge over the abyss. She had earned